Hello, and welcome to our Yoga Hero Teachers podcast. This podcast has been designed to help yoga teachers teach with passion, avoid burnout, and earn a fair living. There are so many potential ways to share your yoga, and this podcast will look at quite a few of them. We'll look at the pros and cons of each, and then we'll look at how to choose where to focus your time and energy. By the end of the podcast, you'll have a great idea of how to share your yoga in the best way or ways for you so that you can teach with passion, avoid burnout, and earn a fair living. The format of this episode will be slightly different to the others. Because I want to give you as much information and food for thought as possible, I'll methodically work through the ways to share yoga, going through the pros and cons for each, one by one. Because I want to be as clear as possible about each way to share yoga, there'll be some overlap and a little repetition, but I'm thinking that that'll only serve, hopefully, to deepen your understanding. If you're on the move at the moment, you're walking the dog or driving about, please don't worry about having to take notes. The pros and cons are listed out in a clear table ready for you. Just go to yogahero.co.uk/podcast 6 to get yours. We're starting off with classes, which I'm defining as an offering that you do weekly that's part of a timetable. Then we'll look at workshops, one-off offerings focused on a particular population or topic. Then courses, which are like workshops, but more than one session, usually between 2 and 8. Then retreats. Then one-to-ones, which you might call private yoga sessions. All of these things can be shared online and in person. So I'll talk about online considerations and in-person considerations for each way of offering as we go along. And then to round off, we'll have a look at how you can know what type of offering is right for you and right for your yogis. If you haven't yet listened to episode 5, you might want to give that a listen in the next few days because it is really relevant here. It's called Find Your Yogis. So if you find your yogis and you look at how to share your yoga with them, you've kind of got your offering pretty sorted, really. Okay, let's get cracking. As promised, we're starting off with classes. So I'm defining a class as something that happens weekly as part of a timetable. Classes can have more traditional Sanskrit names, say Hatha or Ashtanga, or you can use unambiguous names like yoga for relaxation or yoga for back care that immediately convey what the class is about and who it's for. Or you can play with names a bit, like at Yoga Hero, we have Rise and Shine Flow in the mornings and Unwind and Relax in the evenings. Classes are a really common way of sharing yoga. Really popular way of sharing yoga. Classes can be anything from 15 minutes, although that would be rare, to 75 or 90 minutes. And of course, obviously, sometimes you'll get classes that are longer than that. You tend to get 45-minute classes in the morning and at lunchtime when people are a bit more pushed for time, and then 60 or maybe 75 minutes in the evenings and at weekends. Let's look at the pros of classes. As yoga teachers, classes tend to generate income that's a bit more reliable, a bit more regular than income from other offerings. Maybe. You might take on a class somewhere that pays based on attendance, so that's maybe a bit harder to predict. And your class could be cancelled or moved depending on your relationship with the studio or the place and depending on your contract, if there is one. Because it's a week in, week out offering, you can really get to know the yogis that come to your classes and you can start to adapt your offering to suit them. For example, if you can see that some of your regulars are struggling to find space in their twists, you could plan a class focusing on twists, and then they have that knowledge with them for future classes. Related to that previous point, you can really get to know your yogis as actual people. And they also might get to know one another as well, creating a community, which is just incredibly lovely to be a part of. Practicing weekly really does seem to make a difference to people's bodies and minds. And when you can see those shifts and improvements in people, it makes all the hard work really worthwhile. And lastly, in our pros list, classes give you the opportunity to build relationships, to grow and craft and tailor and disseminate your knowledge to build on what's gone before and get as experience as you do so. Now, looking at some of the cons, some of the potential drawbacks in teaching classes, I think that you should really, really seriously consider all aspects of taking on a new class. If you or the place where the class is being held, or both, are putting a lot of effort into promoting the class and encouraging people to come, if you get cover or cancel a class, it really does tend to take people a few weeks to get back into the rhythm of coming weekly again. Whilst I am a really big believer and advocate of taking care of yourself, I mean, that is basically the reason that this podcast exists in the first place. I also believe that you should do your utmost to commit to teaching every week, allowing for holidays and time off, when ideally you'd get cover and let your yogis know in advance. Of course, if you're sick, you probably shouldn't be teaching. If you're really tired, you probably shouldn't be teaching. But that aside, when you're considering taking on a class, you want to think, can I teach this class week in, week out for the foreseeable future? Classes can be really shoddily paid. I know of places that will pay £10 for a 45-minute class. That really isn't a lot of money, so that's definitely something to be bearing in mind. And lastly, a drawback to be mindful of is that a new class can take a while to build up a decent regular attendance. So again, bear that in mind when you're thinking of taking on a class. There's just a few things to consider when you're working out whether you should take a class on or not. I mentioned about potentially poorly paid classes. So whilst I absolutely think you should be paid fairly for your skills and talent and knowledge and time, it might not be just as simple an equation for this many pounds for this class. Because it might be that, for example, you take on a class in a gym, which is a low pay rate, but from that class you pick up, let's say, a couple of private yoga students, which you wouldn't have done otherwise, which really contribute to your income. If you're a new yoga teacher, you're keen for experience and not desperate for the income, you could view that sort of lower income as a small bonus to put to one side while you're getting experience teaching yoga. If you're evaluating whether to take on a new class or not, consider the contract, if there is one, and if there is, what it says, of course. Is there a notice period for you, for the venue, or both? If so, does this protect you, ensuring some income while you try to find a replacement class if it was to be cancelled? Or does it tie you in a way that doesn't suit you? Consider, what would you do if you were offered a class same time elsewhere, maybe for an audience more aligned with your offering, or for more money, or somewhere closer to home, or a nicer space, etc. Also, to bear in mind, if you're thinking about taking on a new class, consider the travel time. You might think, oh, well, it's only 30 minutes walk, but that is 30 minutes there and 30 minutes back. So it's an hour that you are expending energy It's an hour that you're not earning. It's an hour that you won't get back, you know? It might be so lovely and enjoyable in the summer, but in the winter, if you're tired and it's cold and raining and grey, are you really going to walk an hour's round trip for that class, realistically? There's two more things to think about when you're considering taking on a class. The first of those is this is kind of unlikely given the COVID pandemic, but sometimes for classes, if you are renting a space out, you might be required to provide equipment, which might mean lugging a load of stuff about. Yoga mats get really heavy when you're walking around with them and if you've got lots of them. So definitely a consideration. And lastly, consider the potential new classes fit with the rest of your offering. Lastly, in our little classes section, let's look at the different ways that you can share classes, different ways that you can teach classes in yoga studios. I mean, obviously, it's pretty clear. Also in gyms, in leisure centres, swimming pools, Pilates studios, dance studios, workplaces, actually going into offices and teaching your yoga class in a meeting room or a communal area, for example. You can also rent a space out, and in a couple of episodes' time, I'll cover what to look for when you're considering a space to rent with COVID considerations too, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Well, keep your ears peeled, I suppose. And lastly, of course, online classes. Online can be so beneficial because you don't have to consider renting a space out, but it's still your class. If it is your class, people come direct to you. In the next episode of this podcast, as we start to think about the world opening up a little bit, I'll be focusing on how to share yoga in person and online in accessible, COVID-safe, beneficial ways, and how you can help your classes stand out. So again, keep your ears peeled for that. So let's move on to workshops now. Let's look at the pros. Workshops are one-off sessions. They're often called pop-ups for that exact reason. So there's no ongoing commitment. So you can deliver workshops without having to think, am I going to be free at that time every week for the foreseeable future? Workshops can be a fabulous way to go deep into a subject or topic that you're passionate about. Let's say that you love learning and teaching the concept of samskara. So you could design a 90-minute or 2-hour workshop, including a meditation to notice samskars, a physical flow to notice the patterns of movement, habits. Then you teach the concept of samskar and move again with the emphasis on habitual patterns now that people are more informed. So that's a lot of detail and quite a focused subject for, let's say, 90 minutes. But it can be so valuable for people that attend. Related to that previous point, workshops can allow you to test the water on something. Let's say you tend to teach power flows. That's what you're known for and that's what you love. But you'd like to teach people about alignment, which you don't really get time to do in your classes. So you could create, let's say, an alignment of downward dog workshop to drill into the joints, the muscles, the anatomical actions involved. You can get an idea by the response to the workshop and the attendance if your yogis would like to see more of this, maybe in your classes or maybe as an extra class. So you get to test the water without having to commit to a few months of teaching the class and being consistent to get the attendance off the ground. Workshops can be really good fun because you focus on what you're really passionate about. You can team people up and spark off friendships and share your knowledge in your own way. They can be really rewarding as people learn about new things and find things out about themselves. They're just brilliant. I love workshops. I think they're fabulous. Earnings from workshops generally have the potential to be higher or maybe even much higher than classes. Generally, you can charge more for a longer, more focused workshop than you can a sort of more generic class. And once you've made the effort to plan your workshop, do the write-up, take a photo, etc., the write-up, the content, the image is ready for you to go and repeat in the future, maybe after a few months, without all that planning to do again. Okay, so let's have a look at the cons, some of the drawbacks. Thinking about the income, I know that I'm stating the obvious here, but the income is one-off because the event is one-off, so it's not an ongoing income. If only a few people book on, the income can be low and might not seem to equal the time and effort that you've put into the workshop. But don't lose hope, you can always run it again and potentially get more people next time. As a side note here, if people inquire but then don't book, it might be worth just a really polite email to inquire what it was that stopped them from booking, just so that you can take that feedback into account next time. And lastly, in the cons, workshops generally need a lot of promoting. So definitely get ready for some serious screen time as you push the information through social media channels and into your email list as well. So now we've looked at the benefits, the pros, and the drawbacks to running workshops. Here's a few bits and bobs to bear in mind. You can run workshops with and at yoga studios. Some will pay you a set rate, some will pay per person, some will do a combination of these two, and some you'll rent the space from. There's all sorts of ways it can work. I'd say that being paid a flat rate is a great idea for you if you're not like mega savvy with social media or you've not got any idea what the attendance will be. But a per person rate or renting the space out can be great if you're really confident in your following and you think the attendance will be really good. Many times on this podcast, I've talked about refining your skills and offering your audience or audiences that you work with. And this is where this approach really comes into its own. If you approach a studio saying you want to run a flow workshop with some yin at the end, nice and relaxing, well, the studio probably has a couple of these already scheduled and has probably done some quite recently. But if you approach the studio saying you have created a workshop for over 50s women who don't feel over 50s, focusing on increasing range of motion and bone strength, well, that's possibly not something that the studio will have done before, but it's such a useful offering. So by you refining your offering, refining your knowledge, I think you're much more likely to get work with studios. If you run a workshop online, you can do this super simple, like with just a Zoom account. You can even get people to book just by emailing you or WhatsApping you and paying by PayPal. It really doesn't have to be complicated. It can be nice and simple. But if and when the world starts to open up, hopefully not too long away, it makes sense to consider what feels right for online. For example, yoga for fatigue makes a lot of sense to do online because you're not risking tiring people out by trying to get them to a physical space. But a workshop focused on alignment or adjustments would really make sense to do in person. So consider that as you're going along. Right, let's look at courses. So I'm thinking about courses as really quite similar to workshops, but where workshops are one-off, courses would be more than one session, maybe 2, 4, 6, 8, however many you need. Obviously, the increased amount of time and these weekly sessions or regular sessions, I should say, allow you to go even deeper to a subject than you would be able to in a workshop. It allows you to repeat content, which is such a great way of learning. You can give people time to try things out between sessions, etc. But it's not an ongoing weekly commitment like classes are. So the pros: you get to disseminate much more information, allowing people time for it to settle, repeating it and building on it in the following session. Courses can be really enjoyable to teach, especially when it's a topic you're really passionate about, and meeting up with the people more than once means that you might get to know them even better. And courses can be decent earners. People will tend to pay more for dedicated, focused courses than for classes, which are usually more generic. In terms of the drawbacks, like workshops, courses can take a lot of promoting, especially if they're a higher value. You'll need to be really clear about communicating the content, the benefits, and who the course is for. Okay, moving on to looking at retreats. A retreat is exactly that, a retreat from life. They can really be anything from a couple of hours, half a day, to a weekend, a full week, maybe 2 weeks. I'd say weekends and a full week are pretty common. When I started teaching yoga, I found it incredibly hard to find places in the UK that had accommodation, could cater for dietary requirements, and a decent space for yoga classes. But there is plenty more now, thank goodness. Let's look at the pros. So, retreats have the potential to be seriously transformative. That time away from life, diving into information, practicing daily, maybe twice a day, can really make such a difference to people's lives. Because they can be transformative, they can be really, really enjoyable and rewarding to teach and to be part of. And if they're well attended and well organized, they can be a decent earner as well. So you can focus on maybe 1 or 2 really good retreats a year and a few classes, and that might be enough to keep you afloat, maybe. Looking at the cons, again, another financial one, retreats can be financially risky. Usually the finances work in one of 2 ways. One is that you pay a set price, whether you have one person booked on or the retreat is full up. Number 2 is that you pay a set fee per person. If you're just starting and you're not sure how many people you'll get, option 2 works great, because I think it's less risky and you can plan, you know what you're doing. But if you're confident in your attendance numbers, you might be more keen on option 1. Another drawback / consideration, retreats are just knackering. They are exceptionally tiring. I don't think I've met anyone who said to the contrary. I mean, they are rewarding and enjoyable and fabulous, but my God, they are knackering. And I did not realize this when I held my first retreat. It was only a weekend, but I had plans to teach all my normal classes the following week. And I ended up getting cover for nearly all of those classes. I could barely string a sentence together. I was so tired. You'll likely be the last to bed every night and the first one up. You're hosting the entire time and teaching, and probably a sort of go-to person for all questions and everything. So make sure that you have some downtime planned for afterwards. Finally, we are looking at private yoga sessions. Private yoga sessions are you and usually one other person, but it could be, a couple of people, maybe like siblings or people in a relationship or good friends. And they pay for your time, your expertise, and it's dedicated solely for them. I find that these are like the Marmite of teaching yoga. People either love teaching them or they really don't. Okay, so let's look at the pros and cons, and you can think about how and if they can fit into your teaching offering. Pros, first of all. Private yoga sessions can be a really, really wonderful way to share yoga, completely focused on the person or people you have in front of you and what they've asked for or what they need. And because you know exactly who's coming, you can ask them what they would like and plan for it perfectly. Private yoga sessions are a really wonderful way to spread yoga and share yoga because it can allow you to welcome someone to the practice that might not feel comfortable coming to a standard timetable class. For example, a beginner who doesn't want to feel like a beginner, or someone whose anxiety might be triggered by being in a class with others, or someone with a condition or injury that needs special attention. People who love their private yoga sessions can be your clients for life. Absolutely. And because of that, they can be good earners. You can really charge fairly for your time and your expertise. And if somebody books in a good block, then it's good regular income for you. And lastly, in our pros list, you could maybe potentially suggest homework or practice between sessions so that your client really, really feels the benefit of the session, of the practice. And just a couple of cons to bear in mind. You might have to rent somewhere out to hold your private sessions, so bear this in mind when you're looking at the cost. But you might consider going to their house or them coming to you. Either way, please be safe. I know it's not nice to think negatively, I know that. But if you're heading to someone's house, you must let a loved one know where the house is, what time you finish, and that you'll drop them a text or a call to let them know that everything is okay. Same with anyone coming to you especially if you'll be home alone. Sometimes conducting business from your house can be an issue with council tax in the UK, so just talk to your local council about that. And also on the admin side, check that your insurance covers you teaching in people's homes and in your own home if you're planning on doing that. And lastly, I find private yoga sessions can, again, be really tiring, like retreats. So be mindful of how many you teach per day or per week. Okay, so we've looked at classes, workshops, courses, retreats, and one-to-ones or private yoga sessions. We've had some considerations for online and in-person as we've gone through, but teaching online or in-person is really down to two things. One, what works best for your yogis? And two, what works best for you? Episode 5 was all about finding and connecting with your ideal yogis, learning about their problems, their desires, etc. And from that research, you'll start to get an idea of how they want to practice yoga, be that weekly or more regularly, or less regularly, but diving into workshops every so often for deeper knowledge. That really is such an important way to determine how to share your yoga. If your yogis aren't in a position to pay extra for workshops, but they are committed to a week in, week out practice, there's no need to waste your valuable energy and time hunting for a space to hold workshops in. Like I said in the last episode, don't be shy about asking your yogis what they want, what they need, how you can serve them. And finally, think about you. Yes, you. Because your wants and needs are really important. I'm a really big believer in removing barriers, so it's important to teach in a way that you enjoy. If you're offering private yoga sessions but you don't really enjoy teaching them, then that'll show, believe me. It'll come across to your paying clients. Whereas if you feel really passionate about setting up some workshops and sharing your knowledge, then they'll be really transformative for your audience because that passion comes across and people love what you offer. So, as ever, do your research, think about what you want, why you became a yoga teacher, and where you hope to take your teachings. And there you have it, your very own offering ready to share with your yogis. Don't forget that this is all summarized for you in a clear table available at yogahero.co.uk/podcast 6. I hope that you found that useful and happy teaching.